Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're not just reading a story. We are stepping onto what is arguably the most consequential patch of ground in human history.
Absolutely.
We're zooming in on a few acres of olive trees just outside the walls of ancient Jerusalem.
Yeah, it really is the pivot point for the cosmos.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the biblical narrative as a whole, everything from Genesis right up to this moment has been anticipating this night.
Right.
And everything afterwards flows from it.
Right.
We were, of course, talking about Gethsemane.
Gethsemane.
Yeah.
It's a word that even people who don't go to church recognize. You know, it conjures up these images of a garden, maybe a full moon, some silence.
Which is how a lot of the classical paintings depict.
Right, exactly. But when we actually dig into the sources, and we have a massive stack today harmonizing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that peaceful image, it completely shatters.
It does. We tend to sanitize it. We picture this quiet, serene prayer meeting. But the texts actually describe a crime scene, a spiritual battlefield, and a psychological trauma ward all rolled into one.
It's visceral.
It is so visceral, it is loud, and it is terrifying.
So our mission today for you listening is to harmonize these four accounts. We want to get the full picture of the agony, the betrayal, and the arrest of Jesus. But before we get to the what, we have to understand the where.
The geography is so important.
Right, because the sources make a huge deal about the name itself,
Right.
Gethsemane.
Yeah. Names in the ancient Near East are never accidental. They're highly descriptive. Gethsemane is derived from two Hebrew words, get and shimenim,
Which translates to what exactly?
the oil press.
The oil press. Okay, let's unpack that, because we aren't talking about a little kitchen gadget for your salad dressing.
No, think industrial. This was a working olive orchard on the Mount of Olives. In the first century, an oil press was a massive operation.
Walk us through how that actually worked.
Sure. So you would harvest the olives and place them in a large stone basin. Then a heavy millstone, we're talking hundreds of pounds, would be rolled over them to crush the fruit.
To break the skin.
Exactly. That breaks the skin and creates a pulp. But that's just the first step. That is just the crushing.
Then comes the pressing.
Right. You take that crushed pulp and scoop it into these woven baskets that look almost like burlap bags. You stack the baskets up, one on top of the other, and then you use a massive wooden beam with heavy stone weights hanging off the end to press down on those baskets.
So it's using leverage and gravity to exert extreme pressure.
Immense pressure. And under that weight, the oil is squeezed out of the pulp and flows into a collection pit.
That is a very vivid, almost violent image. So
Yep.
we are setting the scene where the Messiah, the anointed one, because that is what Messiah means, right? One anointed with oil.
That's exactly what it means.
The anointed one goes to the place of pressing.
It's the perfect metaphor. Just as the olive must be crushed to produce light and healing balm and food, the Messiah is about to be pressed by the weight of the world's sin. He's pressed to produce the oil of salvation.
He isn't just visiting a garden.
No, he is stepping into the machinery of atonement.
And he knows it.
Yeah.
That's the key part of the narrative we'll see as we go along. He isn't stumbling into a trap here. He is willingly walking right into the press.
Consciously and deliberately.
Now let's set the stage physically. They are leaving the upper room where they've just finished the Last Supper and they're heading to this garden. But to get there, they have to cross a very specific geographic landmark, the Kidron Valley.
The brook Kidron. This is one of those details where if you don't know the history, you just scroll right past it. But if you know the context, it stops you in your tracks.
I was reading the background notes on this, and it's almost like a detail out of a horror movie.
It is honestly grotesque. Remember, this is Passover night. Jerusalem is absolutely packed. Josephus, the ancient historian, estimates there could be upwards of 2 million people in the area.
For the festival.
Right. And central to Passover is the sacrifice of the lamb. The sources say the number of lambs slaughtered in the temple during this festival was staggering.
We are talking about, what, hundreds of thousands?
Easily. Hundreds of thousands of lambs killed in a single afternoon to feed all these families for the Passover meal. That creates an immense amount of blood.
And the temple had a plumbing system for this, didn't it?
It had to. You can't just have that much blood pooling on the stone pavement. It's a biohazard. There was a drainage system built right into the altar that channeled the blood out of the temple complex.
And where did it drain to?
Into the Kidron Valley. It flowed right down into the brook. So on this specific night, that little stream at the bottom of the valley wouldn't just be clear water. It would be red.
Wow.
It would be a slurry of water and the literal blood of thousands of sacrificial lambs.
That is incredibly heavy. So Jesus, the ultimate Lamb of God, leaves the city, walks down into this dark valley, and likely steps over or even through this stream running red with blood.
Just to get to the garden where he is going to bleed.
It connects the symbol to the reality so perfectly. He is crossing the river of sacrifice to become the final sacrifice.
Beautifully said.
But there's another layer to the Kidron Valley, too, a historical echo back to the Old Testament. The sources point us to 2 Samuel chapter 15.
Yes, the story of King David. This is crucial because Jesus is repeatedly called the Son of David. The parallels here are uncanny. In 2 Samuel, King David is fleeing Jerusalem.
Because of his son, right.
Exactly. His son Absalom has betrayed him and launched a violent coup, a betrayal by someone incredibly close to him.
So David has to run for his life.
Right, and the text says David crossed the brook Kidron. He was barefoot, he had his head covered in shame, and he was weeping.
So you have the first David fleeing betrayal, crossing the Kidron in tears. And now, hundreds of years later, you have the greater David, Jesus, crossing the exact same brook.
But look at the stark difference. David was fleeing to save his own life. Jesus is crossing it to lay his life down. David was running away from the betrayer. Jesus is walking toward the place where he knows a betrayer can find him.
He is completely reversing the flight of David.
He is the true king who doesn't run from the threat.
That brings us to the methodology we're going to use for this deep dive. We have these 4 accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And to really get this, we're going to use a 4 lenses framework.
Which is vital, because if we just smash them all together without thinking we miss the specific portrait, each writer is meticulously painting.
Right, it's like 4 cameras filming the exact same event from completely different angles. You need all 4 for the full 3D reality.
Let's define these lenses quickly so you know what to look for as we go.
Start with Matthew.
Matthew is writing primarily to a Jewish audience. His lens is the king. He is highly concerned with authority, royalty, and the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
So even when Jesus is suffering in Matthew, he's still in command.
Exactly. He's the king who sovereignly lays down his life.
Then we have Mark.
Mark is like the action movie of the Gospels. He's writing to Romans, likely recording Peter's direct memories. His lens is the servant.
It's very fast-paced.
Very fast-paced, very emotional, very raw. Mark shows us the urgency and the visceral human reaction of Jesus. The servant suffering to do the master's will.
And Luke.
Luke was a doctor, a trained physician in the ancient world. So his lens is the perfect man. He is obsessed with the physical details, the anatomy of the suffering, and the deep compassion and humanity of Jesus.
He gives us the clinical view, basically.
The clinical and the deeply empathetic view, yes.
And finally, John.
John is the outlier. He writes decades later than the others. His lens is the incarnate God.
Deity on display.
Right. In John's gospel, Jesus is barely a victim. He is the cosmic victor. He is majestic. You actually won't find Jesus sweating blood in John. You find him knocking soldiers to the ground with his voice.
Okay, so King, Servant, Man, God. Let's keep those hats on as we walk into the Olive Press. They arrive at Gethsemane. Jesus leaves 8 of the disciples near the entrance, sort of setting up a perimeter guard. But he takes 3 deeper in, Peter, James, and John.
The inner circle. These are the exact same 3 guys who saw him at the Transfiguration on the mountain, where he shone with unearthly glory.
And now he wants them to see him in the valley in his absolute agony.
He brings them close for his highest high and his lowest low.
And this is where the emotional shift happens. It's like hitting a brick wall. Matthew the King lens records Jesus saying, "My soul is sorrowful even to death."
That phrase, even to death, is incredibly heavy. It means I am so overwhelmed by grief that the grief itself is physically killing me.
It's not just sadness.
No, it's a lethal level of sorrow. His body is literally breaking down under the emotional weight.
And Mark, the servant lens, uses some very specific Greek words here. Ekthymbiomai and adamonin.
Right. These are rare, very intense words. Ekthymbiomai implies a sudden, terrifying shock, like being thunderstruck. It conveys the idea of shuddering with horror.
Shuddering with horror.
An adamonin means to be full of heaviness or severe distress, a restless anxiety.
That is a strong reaction. I mean, what is he seeing? He's God. He knows the future. He has been predicting his own death for chapters now. So why this sudden shock right here in this moment?
That is the profound mystery of the garden. It's the difference between knowing a train is coming and actually standing on the tracks, feeling the vibration as the whistle blows.
The reality of it hitting him.
Theologians suggest that here, for the first time in all of eternity, the Father is beginning to withdraw. The cup is being presented to him.
Let's drill down on the concept of the cup. Because he prays, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. I think a modern listener hears that and immediately thinks, well, he's terrified of dying.
Which is a completely natural reading. He's human. Nobody wants to be tortured and crucified.
But is it just that? Because if he's merely scared of physical death, well, let's be honest. Socrates drank hemlock without flinching. Thousands of early Christian martyrs went to the lions singing hymns. If Jesus is on the ground sweating blood, completely terrified of a Roman crucifixion, doesn't that make him less brave than his own followers?
That is the crucial argument here.
Yeah.
If the cup is just physical suffering, then Jesus, frankly, is not the hero of this story. Many men have died much braver deaths, physically speaking. So the cup must be something else entirely.
It has to be something that only he could see and only he could fear.
It's a spiritual reality. The source material points us directly back to the Old Testament prophets to define this specific term.
Like Jeremiah 25 and Isaiah 51.
Yes. In the prophets, the cup is a technical theological term. It is the cup of God's wrath.
Let me quote Jeremiah 25:15. Take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it.
There it is. The imagery is that God's absolute justice, his holy anger against sin, all the rebellion, all the violence, the hatred, the perversion of human history is distilled into a poison wine.
It's basically the toxic waste of humanity.
Perfect analogy. And it's the righteous wrath that toxicity deserves. It's spiritual death, the total dark separation from all light, all love, all goodness. That is what is inside the cup.
So when Jesus looks into the cup, he isn't just seeing a wooden cross. He isn't just seeing metal nails or a whip. He's seeing the spiritual abyss.
He's seeing hell.
He's seeing what it looks like to be the object of God's unmitigated fury.
Think about it from the perspective of the Trinity. For all eternity, the Son has only known perfect, unbroken love and communion with the Father. Now he is staring down the barrel of perfect judgment.
That explains the sore amazement Mark talked about.
He is recoiling from the spiritual horror of becoming sin. As the Apostle Paul writes later in 2 Corinthians 5:21, he made him to be sin who knew no sin. The Holy Son is about to be treated as if he committed every atrocity in human history.
That puts the prayer in a completely new light. It's not cowardice at all. It's perfect holiness recoiling from evil.
Exactly.
And yet look at the address he uses. Mark records him saying, Abba.
That detail breaks your heart. Abba is an Aramaic word. It's intensely intimate. It is the language of a small child speaking to a father in the safety of the home.
It's not just, oh, great God Almighty, creator of the universe.
No, it's Papa. Daddy. Even while he is looking at the cup of wrath that the Father is handing him, he still totally trusts the Father's heart. He's basically asking Papa, is there any other way?
But the answer from heaven is silence.
The profound silence of God. The answer is you have to drink it. There is no plan B for humanity.
And that leads to the ultimate submission. Not my will, but yours be done.
I want to pause on the two gardens theme right here. Because the notes highlight a massive theological parallel between Eden and Gethsemane.
It is the bookends of the human story regarding sin.
Think back to the very first garden, Eden. You have a pristine environment, total paradise.
Right.
You have the first Adam. He has absolutely everything. No pain, no suffering, no death. And he is faced with a choice regarding the will of God.
A choice to either obey God or to serve himself.
And what does he say? Effectively, Adam says, not your will, but mine be done. He exerts his own will against God, and the result of that is the fall of humanity, sin, death, complete ruin.
Now we fast forward centuries to Gethsemane, the second garden.
You have the second Adam, Jesus. He is in a garden, but it's not paradise. It's dark, it's cold. He is under immense suffering, and he faces the hardest choice ever presented to any human being.
To drink the cup of wrath or to call it off and save himself.
And he completely reverses the ancient curse. He says, not my will, but yours.
He succeeds exactly where Adam failed.
Because he surrendered his will, he ripped open the door back to God. He obeyed in a garden of suffering so that we could eventually enter the garden of paradise in Revelation.
That is just incredible. The spiritual battle is obviously intense here, but I want to switch laces for a minute to Luke, the doctor, because Luke describes the physical manifestation of this intense battle, and it is medically fascinating. Luke 22:44 says, and being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground.
For a very long time, mostly during the Enlightenment, critics said this was just a myth. They thought Luke was just being poetic or employing hyperbole to sound dramatic.
But modern medicine has validated this, hasn't it?
It has. It is a very rare but clinically documented condition.
What is the actual mechanism there? What has to physically happen in the body for a person to sweat blood?
It is driven by the fight or flight response, but dialed up to an absolutely lethal degree. When you are under extreme life-threatening psychological stress, the body releases a massive flood of chemicals and hormones.
Adrenaline, cortisol, things like that.
Right. And this severe spike can cause the tiny capillaries, the microscopic blood vessels that feed the sweat glands, to dilate to the point of rupture.
So the blood vessels actually burst inside the skin.
Yes. And the blood seeps directly into the sweat glands. So when the sweat is pushed out onto the surface of the skin, it is mixed with red blood cells. It usually only happens in cases of people facing imminent execution or extreme psychological torture.
What does that do to the skin itself, to the nerve endings?
It leaves the skin incredibly tender, highly fragile. It's almost like the entire body becomes one giant exposed bruise. So think about this implication. Before the Roman soldiers even touch him, before the first slap in the courtyard or the first strike of the whip, Jesus is already physically compromised.
He's already bleeding for us.
He is already bleeding.
That is the perfect man lens right there. Luke is showing us that Jesus wasn't using his divinity as a shield to cheat the system. He was taking the full physical hit on a human nervous system.
He felt every bit of it. And Luke adds another detail that fits this medical lens perfectly. He mentions an angel appearing from heaven to strengthen him.
Yeah, let's unpack that. If he is God, why does he need an angel? To a lot of people, that feels like a demotion of his power.
It is actually a brilliant testament to the incarnation. He had emptied himself, as Paul says in Philippians chapter 2. He voluntarily set aside his divine prerogative to access omnipotence to save himself.
He was living truly as a man.
Dependent entirely on the Father. He was so completely depleted physically and emotionally by the hematidrosis, by the blood loss and the shock, that he needed external support just to survive the prayer meeting. If the angel hadn't come, he might have died right there in the garden.
Which would have derailed the cross. That is humbling, the creator of the universe having to be supported by a created being.
It really is. It shows the sheer depth of his humiliation for us. He went to the absolute bottom.
Now, while Jesus is going through this cosmic, physical, and spiritual struggle, what is his support team doing, Peter, James, and John?
They are passed out cold.
Jesus asks them to watch for 1 hour, just 1 hour, and they simply can't do it.
It's so frustrating to read, isn't it? You just want to reach into the test and yell at them. Wake up. Don't you see what is happening 10 feet away from you?
But Luke, again, our compassionate doctor, gives us a bit of a clinical diagnosis for them, too. He says they were sleeping for sorrow.
Interpret that for us. What does sleeping for sorrow mean in a psychological context?
Well, we usually think they were just lazy, or maybe they were having a food coma from a big Passover meal. But Luke suggests it was actually a trauma response.
Have you ever received news that was so overwhelmingly bad, so crushing, that you just wanted to curl up under a blanket and go to sleep?
It's an escape mechanism, a total mental shutdown.
Exactly. Deep grief causes extreme exhaustion. They knew something terrible was coming. Jesus had been telling them all night. They sensed the demonic darkness in that olive grove, and their nervous systems just shut down.
They couldn't process the trauma, so they literally checked out.
But Jesus doesn't just let them off the hook, does he? He wakes them up and gives a very stern warning. Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak.
He's pinpointing the core problem of sin in the life of a believer right there.
Yes. It's not that they didn't love him. Their spirit was willing. Peter genuinely wanted to die for him. But they completely underestimated the power of their flesh, their human frailty and weakness.
They thought they were strong enough to handle the darkness of that night without relying on prayer.
And that is a huge lesson on the sin of apathy. They faced the greatest crisis of their lives with self-confidence and sleep instead of vigilance and prayer.
And because they slept when they should have prayed, they fled when they should have stood their ground.
That is the direct cause and effect. Prayerlessness leads to cowardice.
And this brings us to the behind-the-scenes view of the spiritual warfare happening here. Jesus says to the mob a bit later, "This is your hour and the power of darkness."
He is acknowledging the real unseen enemy. This wasn't just Caiaphas the high priest or Pontius Pilate arranging a political arrest. This was the return of the devil.
Right, because remember back in Luke chapter 4, after the temptation in the desert, the text says Satan left him until an opportune time.
Or left him for a season, depending on your translation. And that season of absence is over.
The opportune time has arrived.
This is the final all-out assault. Satan is trying to crush Jesus right there in the garden. He wants to kill him with stress or tempt him to run away so that he never makes it to the cross.
Because if Jesus dies in the garden before shedding his blood as a sacrifice, there is no atonement.
Exactly. And if he flees the garden, there is no atonement. Satan is pulling out every stop.
So the crushing weight, the sweating blood, that's all the enemy trying to thwart the rescue mission of humanity.
The battle in Gethsemane is the battle for the salvation of the world. And his closest friends slept right through it.
Well, the sleeping time is definitely over now. Because now we see lights coming through the trees in the distance. The torches are coming. We're moving into section 3, the betrayal.
And the chaos really begins.
The sources describe a crowd or a multitude. But when you dig into the original Greek specifically in John 18, it's not just a disorganized mob of angry villagers with pitchforks. John uses a very specific military word, spira.
This is a massive historical detail that changes how you view the scene. Spira is the technical term for a Roman cohort.
And how big is a cohort?
A full cohort is 600 soldiers. Now, even if they didn't bring the full 600, even if it was just a maniple, which is about 200 men plus, you add in the temple police, the Pharisees' servants, the officials.
We are talking about a small army.
A heavily armed military force walking into a garden in the middle of the night to arrest a carpenter and 11 fishermen.
It really speaks to their underlying fear of him, doesn't it?
They were absolutely terrified of Jesus. They were terrified of his miraculous power. Remember, he's raised the dead. And they were terrified of the Passover crowds rioting if they tried to arrest him in broad daylight in the temple.
So they brought a first-century SWAT team, effectively.
Exactly. Overwhelming force to ensure no mistakes were made.
And the irony of the lighting here is brilliant. John mentions they came with lanterns and torches.
Right. It's Passover. That means it is a full moon. And in the Middle East, a full moon on a clear night is incredibly bright. You can almost read by it.
But they bring artificial light anyway.
They are bringing man-made fire to hunt down the light of the world. It's highly symbolic. They're stumbling around in the dark, spiritually speaking, trying to find the one person who sees absolutely everything.
And leading the way, holding the proverbial flashlight, is the one man who knows exactly where Jesus goes to pray, Judas Iscariot.
The profound tragedy of Judas.
He had arranged a sign with the soldiers. The one I shall kiss is the man. Seize him.
We have to understand the cultural weight of a kiss in the ancient Near East to get how dark this is. In that culture, a kiss wasn't just a casual greeting. It was a sign of the deepest respect, honor, and covenant friendship.
It was something a devoted disciple gave to a beloved rabbi.
So Judas takes the ultimate symbol of love and loyalty and turns it into the weapon of death.
It is the ultimate perversion. He uses intimacy to destroy. He uses the form of godliness to commit the ultimate sin of betrayal. And it's a direct fulfillment of prophecy, isn't it?
Yes, Psalm 41, verse 9. Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me.
And Jesus' response to Judas varies by the gospel lens, doesn't it?
It does, and each one breaks your heart in a different way. Matthew the King lens has Jesus say, "Friend, do what you came to do."
He calls him friend.
It's commanded, but it's dignified.
Oh.
He calls his betrayer friend, which just twists the knife. He refuses to hate Judas, even in the midst of the betrayal. The king remains noble.
And Luke, the perfect man.
Luke gives us the personal relational lens. Jesus asked Judas, "Would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" It's a piercing question. It's almost like he's giving Judas one final desperate chance to see the sheer horror of what he's doing. Are you really going to do it this way, Judas? With a kiss.
But the arrest suddenly hits a massive snag, and this is hands down my favorite part of the John narrative. The God lens absolutely shines through here. Oh, this is the best part of the whole night.
The soldiers step up to the group. Jesus steps forward. Note that detail. He steps forward toward the army and asks, "Whom do you seek?" They say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus answers,
I am ego emi in the Greek.
And what happens next?
The text says they drew back and fell to the ground.
Let's process the physics of that for a second. A cohort of Roman soldiers, hardened combat veterans, men trained to stand their ground with locked shields against barbarian cavalry charges.
Best military force in the world.
An unarmed Jewish man speaks 2 words, and hundreds of soldiers fall over backwards like dominoes.
It's a shockwave of sheer divine glory. I am is the divine name. It is exactly what God told Moses from the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. I am W-H-O-I-M.
Yahweh.
For a split second, Jesus pulls back the frail veil of his humanity and lets the raw, uncreated power of his divinity flash out.
Why, though? Why flex that power if he's just going to surrender to them anyway? To prove that he is in fact surrendering. That is the entire point. If he can knock an army down with a whisper, then they aren't capturing him against his will.
He is giving himself to them.
It proves what he said earlier in John chapter 10. No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord.
That changes the entire dynamic of the passion narrative. He isn't a helpless victim of the state. He is in total sovereign control.
Total control. He knocks them down, he waits for them to groggily get back up, dust themselves off, and then he holds out his hands to be bound.
And while he's doing that, he negotiates for his friends. He tells the Romans, if you seek me, let these men go.
The good shepherd protecting his sheep. Take me, let them go. It is literally the gospel in a single sentence. He trades his freedom for theirs.
And John notes this is the fulfillment of his own prayer from John 17. Of those whom you gave me, I've lost not one.
He ensures their physical safety so they can survive to preach the resurrection.
But Peter doesn't want to be let go. Peter wants to fight.
Oh, Peter. You have to love his zeal even when it is totally misguided.
He pulls a sword, which, by the way, we should mention, Jesus had told them to bring earlier that evening, right?
Yes. In Luke 22, Jesus told them to bring swords. But most biblical scholars agree this was specifically to fulfill a prophecy from Isaiah 53 about being numbered with the transgressors.
So they would look like a rebel band legally to justify the arrest.
Exactly. It wasn't because he actually wanted 11 fishermen to fight a war against the Roman Empire.
Well, Peter clearly missed that theological nuance. He swings his sword at the head of Malchus, who is the high priest's personal servant.
He swings for the head, but he misses and he cuts off his right ear.
And chaos erupts. I mean, realistically, this should have been a bloodbath. If you swing a weapon at a Roman cohort or the temple guard in the dark, you should be dead in seconds.
Peter should have been run through with a spear immediately. The only reason he wasn't killed on the spot is because Jesus intervened.
And here we see the different gospel lenses clash beautifully. Matthew the King focuses on the authority. Jesus commands Peter, put your sword away, and he gives that famous line, all who take the sword will perish by the sword.
And then the king drops the math. Do you not think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels?
12 legions, let's do the math on that. A Roman legion is roughly 6,000 men. So 12 times 6,000 is 72,000 angels.
And in the Old Testament context, one single angel killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. That's in 2 Kings 19.
So if one angel can delete an entire army, what can 72,000 angels do?
That's not just defeating the Romans in Jerusalem. That is unmaking the solar system.
So Jesus is essentially saying, Peter, I don't need your rusty sword. I have the cosmic nuclear option at my fingertips. I am simply choosing not to use it.
And why does he choose not to? He tells Peter, how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so? He prioritizes the prophetic word of God over his own personal safety. He is completely submitting to the redemptive plan.
And then Luke the doctor gives us the final physical touch to this chaotic scene.
While Matthew gives us the royal lecture on violence, Luke shows us Jesus looking at Malchus. Now remember, this man is an enemy. He is there to drag Jesus to a kangaroo court. He is on the ground, bleeding, screaming, clutching the side of his head, probably in deep shock.
And Jesus reaches out his hand, the very hand that is about to be tied up with rough ropes, and touches the wound.
And he heals him. The ear is completely restored. The last physical miracle Jesus performs before his death is healing the man who came to arrest him.
That is just baffling to me that they still arrested him after that. I mean, if the guy I'm about to handcuff just organically reattached an ear, I might seriously rethink my career choices right then and there.
It's a terrifying showcase of the hardness of the human heart. They saw the miracle, they experienced his power when they fell down and they arrested him anyway. They were so utterly committed to their political narrative that they completely ignored the divine evidence of their own eyes.
And at that exact moment, the disciples break.
They realize Jesus isn't going to fight. He isn't calling down the legions of angels. He is actually going to surrender to the Gentiles. And that completely destroys their paradigm of what the Messiah was supposed to do.
A panic.
Complete panic. The text says they all forsook him and fled.
Just as the prophet Zechariah predicted in chapter 13, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered.
Prophecy fulfilled to the letter.
But there is one weird little detail in Mark's account that we just have to mention. The naked guy.
Yes, the famous young man in the linen cloth.
Mark 14:51 says, a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked.
It is so incredibly specific and so odd to include in such a solemn narrative.
Who is it supposed to be?
Most historical scholars are convinced this is actually Mark himself, the author of the Gospel. It's kind of like his Alfred Hitchcock cameo in his own movie.
Why would he be there?
He was likely a young man from a wealthy family in Jerusalem. Many believe the Last Supper was actually held at his family's house. So he woke up, heard the commotion, grabbed a linen sheet off his bed, and secretly followed them out to the garden to see what was happening.
So Mark is painting himself right into the corner of the picture.
But look at how he paints himself. He doesn't make himself a hero. He's the guy who ran away stark naked into the night out of sheer terror. It symbolizes the total shame of all the disciples.
They were stripped of their dignity, their courage, their bravado, everything.
They left Jesus utterly, entirely alone.
So the disciples are gone into the night. The garden is empty except for the soldiers and the prisoner.
Yeah.
And they bind Jesus and march him back across the Kidron Valley back up into the city. And this begins the next phase of our outline, the legal and historical context.
And if you thought the arrest in the garden was intense, the legal proceedings that follow are a whole other level of dark corruption.
Let's really get into the legality of this, because the sources heavily emphasize that this wasn't just a rough justice situation. It was technically illegal by their own strict standards.
Completely illegal. The Jewish Mishnah, which records the oral laws and legal precedents of the time, had very strict, specific rules for capital trials, cases involving the death penalty.
And this arrest and trial violated them.
It violated almost all of them.
Give us a few examples of the specific laws broken.
First and foremost, the arrest and the initial trial happened at night. According to Jewish law, capital trials were strictly forbidden at night. They had to be held in the daytime, so everything was in the light.
Okay, what else?
Second, there were no formal charges presented before the arrest was made. In a proper legal system, you need an official charge before you arrest someone. Here, they arrested Jesus in order to find a charge against him later.
It was a complete fishing expedition.
Exactly. Yeah. Third, they used a betrayer, Judas. Using a paid informant who was a participant tainted the testimony under their law. And finally, they offered no opportunity for a legal defense. Capital trials were supposed to start with arguments for the innocence of the accused.
So it was just a hit job. It was pure institutional sin.
It was the deliberate collusion of the religious power, the Sanhedrin, and eventually the political power, Rome, to destroy the truth simply because the truth threatened their power structures.
And money changed hands to make it happen. Let's talk about the price of the betrayal.
30 pieces of silver.
That is a very specific amount. It's not a random handful of coins.
It is highly prophetic. Zechariah 11, verses 12 and 13, predicts that the precise price paid for the shepherd would be 30 pieces of silver. And Zechariah even predicts that this money would be thrown into the house of the Lord and eventually given to the potter.
Which is exactly what Judas eventually does when he feels remorse. He throws it into the temple and they buy a potter's field with it. But historically speaking, going all the way back to the time of Exodus, what was 30 pieces of silver actually worth in their economy?
Exodus 21, verse 32 establishes that 30 shekels of silver was the standard compensation price for a slave. Specifically, if your ox accidentally gored someone else's slave and killed him, you had to pay the master 30 shekels to replace the slave.
Wow. That is an unbelievable insult.
It is a massive, calculated insult. The religious leaders of Israel valued the creator of the universe, the prophesied Messiah of their own people, at the exact price of a dead slave. They were essentially saying, this is what your life is worth to us, the absolute legal minimum for human property.
But paradoxically, it completely fits the theological theme we've been seeing, doesn't it? Mark's lens. The servant.
Exactly. He took the form of a servant. He literally became a slave for us. Even their worst insults are unknowingly fulfilling his divine mission.
So we have covered the agony in the garden, the betrayal with the kiss, the arrest the violence with the sword. I want to step back for a moment and look at section 7 of our deep dive, the anatomy of sin. Because this whole narrative acts like a mirror for human nature. We see every ugly facet of humanity reflected here.
We really do. If you look closely at the different characters surrounding Jesus, you see the full tragic spectrum of how sin operates in our lives.
Let's break them down.
First, you have Judas. That represents greed and cold betrayal. It's a perversion of a loving relationship for personal financial gain. It's loving the things of the world more than the God who made them.
Then you have the disciples who fell asleep.
Right. That represents apathy. Spiritual lethargy. It's the attitude of, I love you, Jesus, but I'm just too tired to pray right now. It's the sin of prioritizing personal comfort over spiritual duty.
Then you have Peter.
Peter is violence and self-will. I am going to fix this problem my way with my weapons. It represents religious extremism and acting in the flesh, rather than trusting God's timing.
And finally, the religious leaders.
That is systemic injustice and pride.
Yeah.
The abuse of authority to protect personal empires.
If we're honest, we can find ourselves in all of those characters, can't we?
Absolutely. I know I have been the sleeping disciple avoiding prayer. I have certainly been the reactive Peter swinging the sword, making things worse. I've been the prideful leader protecting my own turf. We all have.
And how is all of that sin ultimately dealt with in this specific story? This is the theological key to Gethsemane.
It is dealt with by Jesus actively absorbing it all.
What do you mean absorbing it?
But look at his actions. He doesn't fight back against the violence. He absorbs the blow. He doesn't flee from the betrayal of Judas. He receives the kiss. He drinks the cup of wrath.
He acts as the sponge for all of it.
He steps willingly into the position of the substitute. He lets the wave of human injustice and divine wrath wash completely over him so that he can take the punishment for the Judas and the Peter and the sleeping friends, and ultimately for us. He counters our active sin with his perfect passive submission.
That really is the so what of this deep dive. Let's transition into section 8, application. For the person listening to this right now, maybe they are incredibly stressed out. Maybe they are facing a betrayal at work or in a marriage. Maybe they are just emotionally exhausted. What does the Garden of Gethsemane say directly to them today?
I think for the individual believer, Gethsemane is an absolute lifeline of encouragement regarding mental health and severe anxiety.
How so?
Because Jesus himself was profoundly anxious. He was sorrowful even to death. He was sweating blood from clinical stress. If the perfect, spotless Son of God can experience that level of overwhelming, paralyzing emotion, then it is definitely not a sin for you to feel overwhelmed.
That is so freeing to hear. It completely validates the human struggle. It says you aren't a bad or faithless Christian just because you're dealing with depression or anxiety.
Precisely. Hebrews 4:15 says, "We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. He felt the darkness." But Gethsemane also gives us the practical instruction for what to do with it.
Right. What did Jesus actually do with his anxiety?
He didn't repress it like a stoic. He didn't lash out at his friends. He took it directly to the Father. He prayed. He threw himself on the ground and he kept praying until he finally got to the place of surrender. Thy will be done.
That is the ultimate remedy. Honest, agonizing struggle followed by submission.
And we also see the promise of divine help in the midst of it. The angel came to strengthen him.
Right. God the Father didn't take the cup away. Jesus still had to get up and go to the cross. But God provided the supernatural strength he needed to endure the cup.
And that is very often how God answers our prayers today. He may not remove the cancer or the financial ruin or the difficult relationship, but he will send the grace and the strength to walk through the fire.
What about for families or communities of believers? How does this apply socially?
I think the warning of the sleeping disciples is the key application there. When a family or a church community is facing a crisis, we desperately need to be vigilant. We need to watch out for each other.
We can't afford to check out into our own little worlds.
Right, we can't afford to sleep for sorrow. We need to actively support one another in corporate prayer. We basically need to be the angel that strengthens the one among us who is suffering.
And what about for those who might be actively resisting God right now? The rebellious, as the outline calls them.
The arrest scene is a very stark, terrifying warning to anyone fighting God. Yeah. You look at that Roman mob. They had all the worldly advantages, weapons, numbers, political authority, the element of surprise, and Jesus flattened the entire army with 2 words, I am.
It shows the sheer futility of fighting him.
Exactly. If you are rebelling against God, you are fighting an unwinnable war. He is not weak. He is just incredibly patient. He laid down his life voluntarily. No one forced it from him. The only rational response to encountering the Jesus of Gethsemane is total surrender.
I want to zoom out to the big picture before we close out today. You mentioned the Garden of Eden earlier and the parallels. Let's really solidify that theological connection.
It is the great sweeping arc of all Scripture, the tale of the gardens.
To take us through it.
The first garden is Eden. It was absolute perfection, a paradise. But it was entirely lost because the first man, Adam, said, my will be done.
Disobedience brought the curse.
The second garden is Gethsemane. It was a place of crushing agony and darkness. But it became the turning point of all history because the second Adam, Jesus, said, thy will be done.
Obedience breaks the curse.
Exactly. And because Jesus succeeded in the darkness of the second garden, he officially opens the way for us to enter the third garden.
The third garden.
The one described at the very end of the Bible in Revelation chapter 22.
Yeah.
The paradise of God.
Yeah.
The New Jerusalem. The text says the tree of life is there, the exact same tree that humanity was barred from eating in Eden.
And we get free access to it now simply because Jesus drank the cup of wrath in Gethsemane.
That is the gospel. From paradise lost to paradise, regained completely mediated through the bloody olive press.
That is a staggering, beautiful reality to sit with. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative image. You brought it up briefly earlier, but it is really sticking with me. The healing of Malchus's ear.
It is arguably the most profound image to end on. Think specifically about the physical hands of Jesus.
Okay.
In just a few moments from that miracle, those hands are going to be violently bound with rough leather straps or ropes.
Right.
And a few short hours after that, those same hands are going to be stretched out and nailed to a rough wooden cross.
The ultimate restriction of his freedom to act.
But the very last sovereign free action those hands took before they were bound was to reach out and miraculously heal the bleeding wound of a sworn enemy.
He actively touched the man who was in the process of destroying him.
That reveals the true unsearchable heart of the Savior. If he showed that level of intimate, merciful grace to the very man dragging him to his execution, what kind of heart do you think he has for you?
That is incredibly powerful.
If you are running away from him today, or if you have failed him miserably like Peter did with the sword, or if you are just apathetic and asleep like the other disciples, his hands are still graciously reached out to heal you.
That is the true Jesus of Gethsemane. He's not a tragic victim of circumstances. He is a victorious king who serves and heals his enemies until the very bitter end.
Amen to that.
Well, next time on The Deep Dive, we are going to follow Jesus out of the garden and into the dark halls of justice, or rather, injustice. We are going to meticulously break down the illegal nighttime trials before Annas Caiaphas and eventually Pilate.
It gets even more intense from here on out. The legal maneuvering is fascinating.
You definitely won't want to miss it. Until then, stay curious, keep seeking the truth, and keep digging deep.